Of course.
on how it was shot, because I had a few guests and give me different pieces of information. The more likely, the theory that I heard the most is that it was an S-300, potentially an S-400. I find that to be extremely unlikely, but most likely an S-300. But there are other ways. It could be a pilot error. You're the expert there, but I'd love you to give us an overview, give me an overview as well on how Iran managed to shoot an F-15E fighter jet.
Yeah, so Iran's claiming that they ended up shooting down the fighter jet right now, but that necessarily hasn't been confirmed through the United States government. CENTCOM has been absolutely quiet on this, other than a couple leaked sources from what's coming out from there. F-15 is a little bit of an air platform with lots of hours on it. It's kind of like a workhorse, right? But they do also go into a lot of different maintenance issues and things like that. So yeah, I would kind of agree with that assessment that if it was shot down, it'd likely be, an S-300 or an S-400, if that is in fact what ended up, happening there. Whether or not that took place is going to be a question. It's going to end up coming out here in the near future. So we don't know necessarily about that. What has came out so far is that the pilot of the aircraft has been rescued, but the what some people would call co-pilot, that's not necessarily true, but the other crew member of the F-15 is still on the ground from the latest I've heard. I did actually just reach out to, I'm going to call it a confidential source for right now that works over inside SecWar's office. They do not have confirmation. I know it's floating around that the second crew member was recovered. That's not necessarily true. I don't have confirmation from them yet that happened, and I got promised that as soon as it does happen, that I'll get brought in on that. Additionally, when we take a look at the area where this ended up happening, it is a little bit closer to central Iran, if you will. But when you zoom in, this is generally speaking the crash site to where this ended up going down, or what is being reported as the crash site. Now, the interesting thing about this crash site is that you have very high ground, mountainous region that is off to the west. You have a river that's running off to the north, and then you have a bunch of farm fields that kind of run off to the east and the south, which kind of channelizes everything. Now, what typically happens when you have any sort of isolated U.S. personnel inside of a combat zone is the United States government, the United States military will drop everything that we are doing and dedicate every single asset that we have over into that region in order to recover that missing personnel. And what's being said right now is that we do have soft troops that are on the ground, like U.S. Special Operations Forces that are on the ground with a lot of aircraft that are going on around. Lots of air-to-ground munitions have been dropped in the region just recently. Obviously, it's dark over there, and that aids significantly when it comes to the pilot being undetected or the crew member being undetected. But it also makes it a little bit more difficult sometimes for our troops that are operating on the ground. But we do own the night, as it is set out there. Reports coming in that the United States Special Operations Forces who are on the ground, along with members of either the IRGC or the Besiege forces, have actually gotten into firefights on the ground as well. And so, that whole area is just going to be isolated from the sky to the best of, United States government's ability. The longer that they end up staying on the ground there, they become way more susceptible to Shahed drones, to artillery, to short-range ballistic missiles, any of those things that, Iran's got left in its arsenal. They could really start, targeting that area. And that's where the real danger is going to come in. The longer this thing drags out, the more, exposed these troops are going to be as they continue to look for this pilot.
How significant would it be if Iran did shoot down the F-15? How difficult is it to shoot it down? Because everyone I spoke with, it's the first time it will be shot down. Scott Ritter said one was shot down in Desert Storm, but beyond that, there hasn't been any shot down. The one in Desert Storm is not reported. I was just told about it by Colonel Wilkerson, who was on the show earlier. But how significant is it? How difficult are they to shoot down?
Very difficult to shoot down. They're very difficult to shoot down, which is why they've been operating for so long over the skies of Iran without being shot down. I think a lot of people have seen the videos of the U.S. aircraft that have been getting chased by surface-to-air missiles, but none of them seem to have impacted until today, if that is in fact what actually happened. I'm kind of sliding away from the maintenance issue when it goes into this, with what could have brought the aircraft down, but you never know. More than likely, in my opinion, it probably did end up getting shot down, but we'll have to wait and see, when that ends up coming out. Last time I think U.S. aircraft actually got shot down in combat was back during the invasion of Iraq.
I thought it was in Yugoslavia. But either way, it's been a long time.
Yeah. It's been a long time. I thought it was like a helicopter, and I'm not talking about fast movers. I'm talking about aircraft in general, a helicopter. Yeah.
Okay. Because the fighter jet was in Yugoslavia. I think it's the only time I know of.
Yeah.
And that was shot down not by friendly fire.
But
just on the rescue operations as well, the aircraft that is being used for this rescue operation, we have the C-130s, the Black Hawk, the A-10s flying on very low altitudes, very slowly as well. We've got the drones as well. What does that demonstrate? Because for me, it just seems, and I've talked about it earlier on the show, it does show air superiority to a pretty high extent. So it's very contradictory, because you've got these aircraft flying around that region trying to find the missing pilot as part of the rescue operation. But then you've also got a fighter jet, an F-15 that was shot. I'm assuming in that same region. I'm assuming it was shot. You see the contradiction. If you were shot in that region, that would mean that region's very dangerous. There's possibly an S-300s that's still around, assuming an S-300 is what shot it down. But then you've got all these bigger aircraft, bigger, slower aircraft that are flying around as part of the rescue operation. We played that footage earlier. That's a helicopter there. We do have information that a Black Hawk was shot, not shot down, but shot and flew back to Iraq with the trail of smoke behind it. But that's the drone, the MQ-9 drone that was flying around as well. Yeah, I'd love your comments on that, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to assume that the aircraft, had a wing blown off, but there's also, the possibility that it was a near miss, but it still ended up catching a bunch of fragment from the munition itself that tried to take it down and cause a mechanical failure in flight as it was trying to make it back. So if that's the case, they could have been returning from operation in order to try to make it back to safety, and the aircraft just simply couldn't limp that far, and they had to make the decision to bail. So that's also a possibility there. And I think it's more of a possibility when we start looking at what is it potentially that they could have been targeting. Obviously, what is being dubbed basically as Rocket City, south of Isfahan, has been getting hit very hard this week. Several airstrikes. I think we had the third one confirmed last night on that location. And I'm not sure if, what they should be doing is taking alternate routes and everything else. But if the IRGC has figured that out, positioned, anti-aerial assets, within the region or suspected regions that they might be flying through, it'd make them a little bit more susceptible to getting hit. So that's always a possibility, that they just got, the aircraft, for lack of better terms, got wounded as opposed to a direct kill. And then that wounded aircraft could only limp so far until they had to bail out.
What's your stance? We haven't spoken in a while. What's your stance on the state of the war today? Iran's ability to continue striking the Gulf, striking Israel, potentially shooting an F-15. What does that demonstrate to you? The report that came in today, according to intelligence officials that spoke to CNN, half of their missile launchers are still, they still haven't been destroyed. Half of their drones haven't been destroyed. And we got a report earlier that a third of their missiles are still, only a third were destroyed, a third damaged, and a third intact.
Yeah, and this, I'm fairly critical when it comes down to whether or not the government's telling the truth and or lying, right, as we start looking at it. But Iran has been building ballistic missiles, and stacking munitions for a very long period of time. It seems like we were focused a lot on different assets, going after different military assets, as opposed to just going after the ballistic missile launchers and everything else. But there's a tier of targets, that you're going to go and take down when you're conducting these operations. And obviously, you're not going to get 100% of them. To give people a general understanding, most people know Texas is pretty big. Iran's about 2.5 times the size of Texas, and they've been digging in for quite a while over there. I believe the Isfahan facility that we're talking about, the Rocket City, so to speak, is a very good example of this. You've got hundreds of launch sites just in this one location alone. It stretches 20 kilometers from north to south. You've got numerous cave entrances where they're obviously going to be storing a lot of their ballistic missiles. And then you have, it had to have been, probably about 100 bunkers or so, ammunition bunkers that they have to just feed, these sites to keep them running. And that's one location. So I'm not privy to all of the intel. I'm not privy to all of the information, but to just kind of give an idea, and as we're flying these aircraft, they can only carry so many bombs. They can only execute so many targets. What that means as far as the capabilities of the IRGC, yeah, they're not done. They still have the ability. It's like we talked about before. Trump coming out saying that he is going to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, whenever he feels like it. It's basically a friggin' lie, right? Because all it takes is, once you hit 136 to go and smash into a commercial, vessel, and no insurance company is going to allow them to sail through. So if you're going to reopen the Strait, it's not positioning military, vessels in the Strait and saying, we own this territory, or, putting Marines on an island, right, and saying we're going to stand here on this island. It is quite literally, being able to stop any munitions from hitting any other vehicle, commercial vessels out there. And with that being said, we quite frankly don't have the ability to do that. It's impossible to expect 100% of all of those munitions, all of the drones, all the ballistic missiles, all of the cruise missiles, just to be completely annihilated before they leave Iranian territory. That's what makes it so difficult. We're just, no system in this world is designed to do that.
Fucking hell, man. What do you make of Trump's speech as well?
I thought it was a waste of my time, to be perfectly honest. Like, if you want, as I'm said, I had to sit there and listen to it for as long as I did. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's.
I stayed up. I remember I stayed up to just listen to it. Yeah, exactly. It's just repeating the same thing. I thought it was a good thing he didn't mention the Strait of Hormuz. Sorry, he didn't mention boots on the ground. But it seems that most people, Seymour Hersh says that this is a confirmation that boots on the ground are inevitable now. That was the way Seymour Hersh interpreted that statement.
Yeah, well, it's like I told you, Mario. I stood by my assessment back then, and I stand by it to this day, that our intent is not to go take any of those islands through the strait, because there's no point in doing so. It's not going to stop a Shahed 136 from flying across Iranian territory into international waters and hitting another commercial vessel and shutting those waters down. My assessment has been and will continue to be going after the enriched uranium, which finally people are catching up to, saying, hey, now we got reports of it. Everybody thought I was crazy for saying it. But you're looking at anywhere between 25,000 to 80,000 IRGC and besieged forces just within the Isfahan region alone. So that within itself, you got to have a very large package in order to get that done, which explains the 82nd Airborne, the 75th Ranger Regiment, numerous, special operations teams, and 2 Marine Expeditionary units. It's going to take thousands of troops on the ground in order to accomplish that.
It just sounds like a suicide mission, man. It just sounds like such a inevitable catastrophe. I know you're more optimistic about it than I am. I'm not the military expert, so obviously your opinion is more important, but it just sounds such a risky operation in this mountainous region. We just got a report now. Again, we don't know if it was shut down by Iranians, but potentially in F-15 that was shut down by Iranians. We know another fighter jet was damaged by Iran as well, that flew into the airport in Saudi for repairs, and we've seen their capabilities in striking the Prince Al Sultan base and other American bases consistently. So if they're able to do this across the region, and they still have so many drones and missiles and missile launchers available, putting the artillery aside and the massive army they have aside, I just cannot see it working. I just cannot see it working without significant casualties on the American side.
Well, the question is, what impact are they having by doing so? Is that slowing down our operations at all? So we can look at, the Islamic regime side, and we can say, X amount of ballistic missile decrease since the beginning of the war, X amount of drone decrease, fired into different nations since the beginning of the war. On the flip side, you have, airstrikes that have increased from the U.S. and Israel to a certain degree over inside of Iran. But yeah, as far as the suicide mission goes, that's where intelligence and that's.
Matt, an A-10, it just came in now, New York Times, an A-10 Warthog attack plane went down around the Strait of Hormuz at a similar time to the F-15. The lone pilot has already been rescued. How significant is it for an A-10 to go down in the Strait?
So that's a little bit more significant in my opinion, to be honest, a little bit more significant in my opinion. That was the US's, if that's true, by the way, I've seen the New York Times get a lot of things wrong, but hopefully they've got evidence to back that up. But the A-10s and the AH-64 Apache helicopters were kind of the U.S.'s deterrent for any of the unmanned surface vessels or any of the drones and stuff like that were going to be flying around the area trying to target commercial vessels. That's kind of what the U.S. was using in order to get the strait opened up, to try to hammer all of those positions down. A-10 itself, isn't that great when it comes to surface to air, right? Deterrence, but it most of the time you end up putting that sucker into use is after all of that stuff has been cleared out. It's not designed to be over there dodging it. It's designed to primarily hunt tanks, is where it actually came in, and they've upfitted it over the years. But yeah, I mean, that would be
very old aircraft, isn't it?
It's extremely old. Yeah, it's extremely old. Yeah, they were actually looking at decommissioning it like 10 years ago.
How easy or difficult is it to shoot down?
They're extremely difficult to shoot down. Like, you'd have to blow a wing off that sucker.
No.
Yeah, man, you'd have to straight blow a wing off that thing. There's a picture out of Iraq of an A-10 that is just riddled with freaking bullet holes, man. Just absolutely been fragged to hell. been tore all apart, and the pilot's still able to fly it, land it, no problem. It's designed to fly very low and slow. It's designed to support ground troops and to take on things like that. And so they actually have, a bunch of ballistic protection around the pilot because of that. And so that aircraft can get blasted to hell and still fly. So that means that they had to have, if that is true, they likely had a direct hit on it.
New York Times is reporting. I've got the rest of the story now. A second Air Force combat plane crashed in the Persian Gulf region on Friday. So today, and the lone pilot was safely rescued, according to two U.S. officials who spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss operational matters. The A-10 Warthog attack plane went down near the Strait of Hormuz about the same time that an Air Force F-15E was shut down over Iran. How could they both be shut down at the same time? In that incident, one crew member was rescued, and search and rescue operators, we haven't had any get shut down throughout the whole war, and suddenly at the same time both are shot.
Yeah. So here's how I see that going down. It would be, like I said, the F-15, because if you look at where it went down, it's kind of in an ideal location, right? Where the F-15 pilots ejected, pretty ideal location. Like, couldn't ask for a better location in the middle of a hostile nation to be shot down, right? If that's what happened. As soon as that happens and that goes out, those pilots are going to turn and burn and get there as quick as humanly possible and try to help out. And they're going to blow off a bunch of things that they normally wouldn't. A bunch of safety concerns, a bunch of safety measures to go over there and protect the other pilots that are on the ground, right? So whatever operation they're running, they likely just steered and started going towards it, and then blew off some safety concerns and ended up getting hit. That would be my assessment for how that would go down.
Matt, always a pleasure to have you. I'd love to have you back on the show if you're free in a bit, in about 45 minutes. But I'm glad you were able to come in and give us a bit of an analysis